Platemark is a podcast about prints and the printmaking ecosystem. In every episode, we'll hear from folks who occupy various roles in that ecosystem. I'm your host, Anne Schaefer. I work to promote prints and printmaking through this pod, organizing fine art print fairs across the country, and also by organizing exhibitions, albeit intermittently. The goal of the pod is to demystify the world of prints and printmaking, which can be technically challenging, and to demonstrate the range of opportunities to work in this charming corner of the art world. This is a show that takes you behind the scenes to expose the generous, collaborative, and creative people working to better the world one print at a time. Today's guest is Dan Welden, who is best known as the developer-inventor of solarplate etching. Solarplate etching is a revolutionary, chemical-free printmaking process, and he's written several books about it. We also talk about his work with significant artists like Willem de Kooning and Elaine de Kooning, and also Eric Fischl and others. We talk about creative struggles, preferences for classical music, and we even get a video tour of his handmade house, which is full of interesting things, including a piece of his hip bone. You got that right. He's a delight to talk to. He's a legend in the field, and I think you'll enjoy him. All right, housekeeping. I identify as a cishet white woman, and I use the pronouns she, her. I record Platemark in Baltimore, Maryland, the land of the Piscataway Conoway people. Images Dan and I talk about are in the show notes over at platemarkpodcast.com. You can also hit the support and donate button over there and help me keep the lights on. And also you should hit the listener survey and let me know what you think about the pod. Help me figure out where to take the pod next. All right, let's get rolling. Dan, it's so great to see you. Thank you for coming on Platemark.
Well, thank you, Anne. It's great to be here.
Yeah, you've been on my list, and we finally circled around and got time to do this. So I'm thrilled that you're here, and there's lots to talk about. But can you introduce yourself for everybody?
Okay, my name is Dan Welden. I live in Sag Harbor. I'm a printmaker, painter. I write a little bit. I discover many things, and I feel guilty.
Okay, that's a dangler.
Yeah, I know it is because, and I was just thinking about it before because I'm a very dedicated printmaker, and I've been painting lately, so I feel guilty about having a good time. It's a very interesting kind of a feeling because I'm enjoying the painting so much. I've always enjoyed everything creatively, but now that I'm painting, there's some sort of a guilt, shouldn't I be making prints? And so, but I can't right now. I just have to paint.
Oh, hey, you do you, as they say. Yeah. But it's kind of interesting because a lot of the printmakers that I've talked to, a lot of the artists who make prints, talk about the canvas feeling so too direct and too, I don't know what to do. Like there's a real sort of aversion to it, and you embrace it all.
Interesting, yes. I started out as a painter. And then when I went to school in Munich, I met a man who guided me into printmaking. His name was Kurt Lovasser. And he just rolled out the red carpet for me, and he said, let's do this. And so I got into using stone lithography. And it was all, there's the history after that.
Yes, I did read somewhere that you had started with stone lithography, which still seems like a mystery and magic to me, but I won't make you run through it for me. But in the end, you are best probably known in the printmaking circles as the discoverer, inventor, proponent of solarplate etching. How did that come about?
Through him, through Kurt Lovasser. In 1970-71, he put a plate in my hand. He said, try this out. I said, what do I do with it? He was a kind of a teacher that wouldn't tell the answers. He would only put the questions out there. And he said, figure it out. And so that's what I had to do. He didn't tell me how to do it or deal with it. One thing led to another, and then I came back to the United States again and started exploring it. It took a while to get it really going, and then I got a grant through New York State Council on the Arts, and they put up some money $8,700 to be exact. And that was back in the 80s, and that was a lot of money. And so I started developing it more and more. And I had a great time with it. But I only did it for myself. I never did it with other people, other artists in mind. And then when other people came along and they said, oh, I'd like to try this out, I said, fine. And I have to credit Eric Fischl with the major impetus and motivation, because once he said, yeah, let's do this, then we went through trial and failure, one after another. He was just so patient. And it was actually for an article for the Smithsonian's publication called American Art. And Richard Fields was doing the review of it. And this is back in, I think, 1992. From there on, it just took off, and it became much more popular. He gave it a lot of validity, because before that, I would show people, and they thought I was cheating.
Oh.
Because it was really so easy, so simple. I mean, compared to other printmaking processes, it didn't have any chemicals. It had sunlight and water. And, I wasn't poisoning myself, so therefore I was cheating. And this kind of, all printmaking just about had these bad elements, whether they were chemicals or knives or something that could be dangerous.
It's such a macho.
You're right. You're
thing.
right. Absolutely. And I'm glad you said that, too, because the toughest thing for me was to get men to change, because women were much easier and much more open to trying new things. And that's the nature of the beast. When we talk about simplicity and complexity, the male simple mind likes to do their thing and never mind these other things, where the female mind is just so open and gathering to, oh, let's try this, let's try that. If it doesn't work, okay, I'll make it work. And in fact, I'm doing a panel discussion in March on women printmakers, because it's something I really believe in terms of how women have taken over printmaking.
Okay, who are you going to talk about?
Well, I'll probably start off historically with some of the royalty back in the day. Madame Pompadour was a printmaker, and Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. Queen Victoria did twice as many prints as Prince Albert did. And I'm going to surprise people with one person. It goes back to the year 32 AD.
What?
Yep. There was a woman who was in Jerusalem, and she was in the processional on the way when Jesus Christ was going to the cross. And at the sixth station, when he fell down, she took her veil and put it on his face and made a monoprint.
Yes.
Of course, it was done for a different reason as opposed to creating beauty. It was done, and there was an impression made.
I know it's a miracle and all that, but how do you suppose that actually, what would give whoever put that in the Bible the idea that that was you know what I mean?
Well, they didn't call it a monoprint.
Right.
They just call it, Veronica's veil.
Right.
But in any case, that was, it was very symbolic and very sought after, and many paintings were done after the subject and all. So I think it's really kind of a cool technique,
Well, I would sure like to know how they did it. She did it.
Well, you just take anything, whether it's a face or a footprint or a hand. People use body parts to make prints all the time.
Right. I suppose it could have been a combination of sweat and...
Well, blood.
And blood.
Because the crown of thorns obviously was created, and sweat, of course.
Right. Oof. Oof.
Yeah.
But when you get up to Madame Pompadour, are you going to hit on Marguerite Gérard, one of my favorites?
I don't know that much about her. I know a little bit, but my favorite is Kate Kolwitz.
Oh, yes.
So she is one of my all-time favorite printmakers.
Well, she's a triple threat, isn't she?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, True, who does the History of Prints series with me, and I did an episode that focused on one print, and it kind of pulled, we kind of went through the whole, composition, like putting ourselves in the guise of an art student and thinking about the composition and the light and the this and the that and talk through the whole thing. And I picked, actually, it was me. I picked Battlefield, which still gives me shivers to this day because it's so incredibly intense. But when we were sitting there looking at it, things sort of started appearing that I had never seen before, and we were looking at it on a screen, but I was like, oh my God, I've never noticed that part. And, it was like a long looking exercise that really was fruitful.
It's amazing as you look and you see it on a different day in a different light, how things change and come in and enter our minds, because our minds change, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So my question about solar plate.
Okay.
Is it's the closest to etching, right?
It's the closest to, as far as printing, yes. In concept, no. Because in concept, it's so much more direct than regular etching. Because in regular etching, you're putting grounds on a plate, where this is already prepared. And you work, well, let's put it this way. There's so many different approaches to the solar plate, and I've done them all. But I discovered it in a way that it would be very direct, very much like the lithographic stone, where I would have the stone prepared and just draw on it. That autographic quality I just transferred into the idea of making etchings that way. And so I paint or draw right on the plate, stick it out in the sun, expose it. The plate hardens with the sun, and any part that had a drawing on it washes away. That's bitten, and that becomes deep. But the technique that I like very much also is where I take a piece of glass and I grain it just like a lithostone, and I draw on that glass with a pencil, with anything, just like a stone. And the surface being identical to the stone. It's just so similar. When I was a student, before I went to Germany, I did etching, but I didn't, and I loved making the plates, but I was never happy with the work at the end.
What?
The plate making part I loved, and the printing I liked, and the result I couldn't stand. And that's why I went to painting, because I could see what I was getting, and I was not the adventuresome type at the time.
But
I had to know what I was getting.
Oh,
and so that it was the mysteries of printmaking did not enter my mentality at that time.
So it took you a while to really become a printmaker?
And how, yeah.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I was doing big paintings, 6-7 feet paintings, and that's how I was accepted into the academy in Munich. And they said to me at the time, I was a little older, and they said, well, what do you want to come here for? Because they saw that I was somewhat established. And I said, no, I don't really know what I'm doing. I was painting abstract, I was painting landscapes, I was doing figurative work, I was, all over the map. And there was no identity to Dan Welden. There was no label there. And I was seeking that. What am I going to do? So that's where the printmaking and stone lithography started giving me a little bit more of a focus and a direction. And then through stone lithography and Kurt Lovasser, when he put that plate in my hand, he said, here, try this out. And then the rest became history. I made it work, and the grants came along. I wrote the book on it.
That is another question. Did you suddenly say, I'm going to write the textbook that I wish I had when I was teaching? Or did somebody say, hey, could you write this down?
Well, it took me years and years because I procrastinated and I couldn't get it done. And then all of a sudden, I heard of two women in Australia, Pauline Muir and Diane Longley, after being in Australia, somehow or other, they got wind of the technique and learned a little bit about it, and they said, well, let's write a book about it. And I said, oh, bummer, they beat me to it. And so what happened was very interesting, because I still didn't do anything about it. And one day I got a letter from Diane Longley saying something about, do you own this? And what can you say about that? And And I got another letter from Pauline and said, and I'd like to give you all the material we've written. Would you like to have it? And I said, well, I don't really need it, but let's do this together. She was a scientist, an organized person. I'm totally the opposite. And I said, and we became solid friends, and we wrote the book together. So I had the information, she had the discipline, and that's how it all came about. And we're still good friends to this day. And that was back in the 90s.
What happened to aren't you co-author with just the one person? What happened to the other one?
Yes, that is Pauline Muir.
Right. What happened to Diane?
I met her briefly once, but I don't know.
Oh.
She did her own little book. It was a nice little book, and that was it.
My question, I'm back on how the solar plate thing works. Like, can you use the plate that's prepared like a grounded plate for etching?
Yeah, it's a steel-backed polymer surface. The polymer surface is light sensitized. So basically you have this piece of metal with a plastic coating on it. And that plastic coating is light sensitive to UV light. So if you take that and you stick it out in the sun, it exposes the whole thing, and it's no good for anything. But if you block out parts of it, and you could use it, you can say, put objects down and put doilies, cheesecloth, and leaves and all that in front of it, and put a piece of glass to sandwich it nicely together, and then you expose it, and you bring it in, and then start washing it with water with a brush, and wherever the objects were, they will be bitten away. Now, I don't do those things because I draw and paint. And most people like the idea of taking something like a piece of acetate or a photograph, in fact, and they can scan their photography or they can scan their images and create on the computer, and they create a transparency. They put that transparency in place of drawing directly. And then they process it with the sun, wash it with water, and their photographic image will come out right on there. I don't really promote that kind of work because it turns to be more towards the reproductive end of things as opposed to being original. If I do promote the idea of photography, but take the photograph and change it and alter it, scratch into it, add to it, take away from it, and then it has much more integrity in my eyes than taking a photograph and reproducing it.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. But it's also sort of closer to screen printing than, except for how you get the...
Yes, it's very close to screen printing, except it's much higher quality.
Oh!
Yeah, so, I mean, higher quality in the sense of what you can get. I'm not saying that screen printing is faster and much more efficient. You can do color, you can do much more impressions through screen printing than you could with printing and etching. But you cannot get the tones and the values that you can get with this. So with this solar plate process, as in lithography, you can get beautiful gray tones and all the delicacies. I can tickle a plate with just a tiny little, with a pencil or a black etching ink, and it'll all come up at full range. So that's what's really nice about it, as you can in lithography.
When you say when you wash it with water with the brush and it gets bitten, you're basically removing the photosensitive gel or whatever it is?
Correct.
Okay. Which means that it's removing the material. It's not biting into the steel substrate, is it?
No, it's just a polymer.
Okay.
So the polymer is coated onto what they call an anti-halation layer of the steel. So that makes the polymer, it's a little complex, but it's just basically takes the polymer and removes it. It's interesting because it's so scientific, and because it's dealing with chemistry.
But so when you're printing it,
It's totally intaglio.
Yeah.
It's a deep bite.
Okay.
Or a shallow bite. You can get a range of different levels.
Based on how much you've put onto the plate.
Based upon how black the image is.
Okay.
So the blacker the image, the deeper it'll bite.
Ooh.
Yeah.
I've never tried this myself. So.
Well, we have to do something sometime about that. I did quite a few workshops in the Baltimore area at one time.
Well, there's a studio here, the Sol Studio. Soledad Salome has a.
Yeah, she was one of my students. Yep.
Well, there you go. Yeah. So
yep.
there are people doing it here. Yeah.
Wonderful. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Brian Garner also was working with.
Brian is a terrific guy. Yep. Brian printed Eric Fischl with me back in the day, back in the 90s.
Oh, don't age him. He won't like that.
Oh, that's too bad. He's still a kid.
That's right.
Brian was so dedicated, and he really dedicated. He was a student at MICA at the time. And he just jumped in when I was doing a demo, and I said, I like this kid. I said, why don't you come to Sag Harbor and you can help me? So he did. And then we came a few trips, and one of the times we were printing, and he couldn't stay. I said, okay, get on the train, take the press with you, and print it at home. So he carried the press on the train with him. Oh. And then he got involved with Tamarind and started doing more lithography.
Right. When I first moved to town, well, is that right? Yeah. Mid-2000s, I think. He had set up a studio, not at MICA, but, his own studio. And he was working with some artists there. And we went over to visit the other curator I worked with, Rena Hoisington. We went over to visit, and he had been working with this artist named Juan Logan, who was from North Carolina somewhere, Raleigh, I think. And he wanted to make some work with some slave shackles and neck collars that he had collected over the years. He was a black artist. And so he and Brian devised this thing where they kind of created echoes of the forms by spray painting over the form onto the acetate and then and transforming those into...
I didn't know about that. That's nice. Wow.
Yeah, they're quite beautiful. And we ended up buying a set of them for the museum. But he kept telling us about how difficult it was. You had to have, the pressure had to be so tight in order to get any of the sort of, they look like mezzotints, really, the velvety blacks and stuff.
Sure. Were these done on the big press?
I assume so, yeah.
Did you see a studio with the big Dufa press in there?
Yeah.
That was my press.
Oh.
Yeah. I got that from Deli Sacciolato.
Who's that?
Deli Sacciolato and Donald Saff wrote the book Printmaking, black and white, and it was the best textbook on printmaking ever came out. Really, really a great book. And Deli was in New York, and they both worked at Graphic Studio, and basically they did a great job. I used that as my text when I was teaching at the University at Stony Brook.
Yeah, Brian's story about the pressure was really fascinating to me. But the prints that came out of it was just beautiful.
Brian's a great printmaker.
Yeah, he is. So you're mentioning that his press, Brian's press, was your press. Always, it makes me think of this project I want to do that I haven't started, which is to write a book, basically, or maybe do an online directory that traces the provenance of every press that has historic whatever, more than one owner, because they've always been somewhere really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like you have whose press?
Stanley William Hayter. Yeah.
Uh-huh. How'd you get that?
It was in New York at the Manhattan Graphic Center. And they offered it to me because they couldn't use it. The wheel that turns the press was large enough to open up the Panama Canal. It was so big and so cumbersome that they couldn't use it. So Perry Tymerson and I actually had I took a trip to Pittsburgh and picked up a press there and two presses in Allentown, and on my way back through New York, Perry and I picked up the big one from Manhattan Graphic Center, loaded it up into the truck rather, and brought it back to Sag Harbor. And then basically restored it, got it back into shape. It was shown on exhibition at Syracuse when they had the Bill Hader show there. Did you see that show by chance?
I didn't, but I have the Dominic sent me the catalog, which was very nice, the curator. Yeah.
I hadn't seen it either, so yeah.
Yeah, no, we are both on the sort of driving committee of the Atelier 17 project, which is an effort to help spread the word and encourage new research and exhibitions celebrating the centennial of the Atelier, which was formed in 1927. So
that's when it was formed. Yeah.
Yeah, so we have this. Dominic and I are both on the board with Christina Weil, who's the driving force as usual.
Yes.
Yeah.
I met Christina about a year and a half ago or so. She came to lecture on her book.
Oh, great.
And it was interesting because we went out with Helen Harrison and out to dinner afterwards at the tavern where Pollock would visit frequently. And Christina and I were sitting together, and she said, Dan, don't turn around. But Bill and Hillary just walked in. Oh. And I said to her, Bill and Hillary who? And it was interesting because this little tavern, you would never expect the Clintons to walk into this place. But there I turned around, of course, and after a little bit and saw them, and I said, it's really them. And it was so interesting because I had to go to the bathroom, and I went, and the Secret Service guy came in with me, and I didn't know if he had to go or if he was checking me out, because here we are. And so I started talking with him. I said, so what's it like working with them? He said, oh, they're really terrific. They're really wonderful people. I've been working with Bill since he was president and everything. And fine. And then I went out, came back to the table. And then Bill went up to the bathroom, and it took him about 20 minutes to get back because everybody was stopping him and photo. And so what was interesting, he came back. I said, okay, there's my signal. I can say hello to him. And I got up, and I started talking with him, and he put his hand on my shoulder for 7 minutes, and he held his, and he was talking, and everybody else gathered around at the time. I felt the energy of this man, and it was so beautiful. And then I felt kind of bad that Hillary was sitting there, and I went over to Hillary, and I said, oh, I love you, Hillary. And she said, oh, and then Bill came around. We got a picture. Helen Harrison took a picture of the three of us, and I was so starstruck. So anyway, that was a cool thing. And Christina pointed it out to me. That's
nice. I lived in D.C. when Clinton was president, and I was working at the National Gallery. And I only saw him, I think, once physically in person, and he was running on the mall with his large coterie of people. But he, in fact, had one of those auras of charisma, oozed it.
Yeah.
Even from 100, feet. It was incredible. The only other person I've ever seen in person that I felt like had that same thing was John Kennedy Jr.
Wow.
Young Kennedy. Yeah. I saw him on the street in New York one time, and I was like, ooh.
Wow. Yeah.
Same thing. It's crazy.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know how you get that.
Yeah. Well, it's something.
Yeah, it sure is. Before we started rolling, you also told me that you knew Hayter socially.
Yeah. Well, it started out through his, probably an exhibit or something, and then he had an exhibition on Long Island here at Elaine Benson Gallery. And then Elaine invited me to go to the Kooning retrospective at the Pompidou Center. And I was going to be in Europe anyway. I said, okay, I'll catch the show. And then I heard that Bill was going to come. And I said, well, I think I'll stop by and say hello to him, and which I did. And we started talking. And then he needed a ride. He didn't really need it. I just offered him, I had a rental car, and I don't think he was driving. And so I said, would you like me to pick you up? And he said, sure. So I picked him up, and we went to the Pompidou Center, and we had this really nice time together. He was such a wonderful man. And the highlight, of course, was when he said, would you consider swapping prints? And, so to receive one of his works was such monumental thing for me to be honored in such a way like that, because I'm small fry compared to that giant.
But his whole spirit was about community, and
he was a sharing man.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. When I was doing research for a show that never happened, but the thing that started my interest in Hayter, had two chances to go and visit with Mrs. Hayter, Desiree, long after I never met Hayter. He died in 1988. I wasn't interested at that point. This was in 2015 or something. But she talked about the trading, and she would pull out a few things, and I could tell that the flat files were full, not of Hayter's print only, but like all yours and whoever else he had print. Like he had a huge collection, like all artists of your ilk do, right? So you have a huge collection too.
Yes.
And then what happens?
Well, that was pretty much it. We had a good luncheon, and that was the last time I think we ever communicated, because he was still playing tennis at the time, and so that was really, I was amazed at a man of his age. I don't remember what year that was, but back in the 90s. Elaine was okay at the time; she was still healthy.
Hayter died in '88.
Elaine died after that.
Yeah. But Hayter played tennis, I think, until, the day before he died.
Is that right?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, well.
I think Jim Stroud was playing tennis with him, and he died the next day.
Who was playing?
Jim Stroud from Center Street Studio.
Oh, right. Wow. Oh, that's right. Wow.
I'll have to re-ask him that story, but yeah, I think that's right. I know, it's crazy.
Yeah.
But this brings up this idea of trading, which we, of course, encourage, all students to do. My friend True does a little portfolio with the class, and so everybody in the class gets one of everybody's thing, which I think is a brilliant plan, of course. And it's, it's an intro class. It's your first portfolio, which is fantastic. But then, when you get to be a seasoned artist, you have quite a collection. So do you know what number of prints you've got in your collection that aren't yours?
No, I have no idea, because there was a while there that I was, when I was teaching at the university, that I would ask a student from each one I would require the students to do an edition of 10 pieces that look, and I would ask them for one impression. And so, I don't remember even if I have so many, but I think most of the collection that I have was because I printed so many other people's works too, whether they were from stone or from plates. And, some of them became quite valuable because of the names of the artists involved. It was just one of those things. I really never considered it to be valuable in terms of, I didn't do it for the money. I just did it.
I would never have imagined you to think we were all going to get rich doing this.
No, not.
Right. But you've worked with both the Koonings, right?
Right.
And you had a special place in your heart for Elaine, as I understand it.
Yes, that's true. Elaine was a friend. She just was a very down-to-earth person that, I didn't have running water or plumbing in my studio at the time when we worked together. So she said, where do you go to the bathroom here? So I said, well, I just down behind the bush there. And she says, okay, I just want to know, can I use it? And so she didn't hold back. She just went there, and that was it. And she never said a word. I found that to be really terrific. That, she could just do whatever.
How many editions with her did you make?
I did. It started out with these little things that were part of the Lascaux series that we did quite a few, small pieces. And then we did the largest stone lithograph that I ever did with anyone, and it was probably a 40-something inch image. It was huge. And she came to Stony Brook University where I was teaching, and she I said, Elaine, you want to come over here because it's a little warmer here than it is in my studio. And she said, sure. And so she came, and she was able to do one image after another. And, I'd have to count how many I did, probably at least a half a dozen images. We also, I think the first project might have been for the Southampton Hospital when we did a fundraiser. And that was for her Bacchus series from the Luxembourg Gardens, a sculpture that she liked. And then after that, she did something else before the Lascaux series, and that was a piece called Scrimmage, which was a 30-inch stone lithograph of basketball players.
Oh, my.
Elaine did so much. She was a brilliant artist. She did portraiture. She did abstract work. She was all over the map with her work, and but she was good in just about everything she did.
Do you feel like she was overshadowed by Willem?
Well, that was, yeah, without question. He was, her teacher, I think, and everything before. He was older, and he was supposed to pass before she was, but that didn't happen.
Yes, one can never plan for that, right?
No. She saved him. She really saved him because he was a pretty bad drunk, and he was Dutch, and Dutch people from the Netherlands like bicycles, and he went everywhere on his bicycle, and I guess he was really in bad shape one day, and somebody called an ambulance, and he threw up on the guy's shirt, and the guy said, "I'll never wash this shirt." So, we have all these little rumors about, because, in the neighborhood, this is what he was about. But Elaine stopped him from drinking, so she set him straight. One time I went over there with my son. My son was a little kid at the time, and I cooked him a venison spaghetti dinner, and we watched Star Wars after that. So that's about how long ago that was. And my son, Carl, he was up at school in New Paltz, and he told his art teacher, he said, "My dad and I went to visit an artist." And so she said, "Oh, that's nice, And he said, "Oh, he was a nice studio too." She says, "Oh, that's not, And what was his name?" And he said, "Oh, it was Bill. His name was Bill DeCoo or something like that." And so she said, "You don't mean Willem de Kooning?" He said, yeah, that's it." And she almost fell over, of course, when this little kid told her that. So it was nice that she knew of him.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. But he was a great man. He was a fantastic man. I try to use him as an example when I'm teaching students about how they feel many times about insecurity and what we're doing as artists, because we question ourselves. We question what we're doing. Is it good enough? That kind of thing. And one time he was doing a drawing while I was present with him on a lithographic stone. And he didn't look at me or anything. He sort of spoke to himself, and I was behind him. And he said, "What do you think? Do you think that's enough?" And my teacher hat went on, and I said, "Well, I think you could probably add a little bit more." And he looked at it, and he says, "Yeah, you're right." And he added something. So I say this to my students. I said, "Look, here's a giant of a man who is at the top of, the ladder in terms of any artist in the whole world. His painting just brought $20 million more than any other artist alive. And this man asked me a question of how to," and I said, "If he could ask you, you could ask a child. I mean, that's what we are. We can ask anybody when we don't know for sure."
Sure.
And so it helps, I think, to instill a little bit more confidence with the student, that doesn't know where they're going.
That's really interesting, because when people always want to put their best face forward when they're talking to me for the show, for the podcast. And people don't, I haven't really talked to anybody about the inner doubt, the inner turmoil, the inner, child that's saying, "Oh, you're not good enough," or whatever. And I feel like you're the most exposed somehow. Like, you have to be such a raw feeling person to tap into your creativity in the first place. And then you got to get it to come out of your hands, right?
Well, it's true, but I think it's true with all of the arts, whether it's a poet or a dancer. If you make a mistake, it's seen right away, and people are going to say, "Oh, you hit the wrong note." So there's that sense of vulnerability that is always present. The nice thing about the visual artist is you're not necessarily there to hear people's comments. So when you're in a show and somebody says something, but we get the critics after the fact, after it's done, and they'll comment on how they like or don't like it.
I read, as I was reading up on you recently, that you are very interested in music, particularly classical music.
Absolutely, my passion.
Yes, I'm also a fan of. And I agree with you about this idea of music being the ultimate in its ability to elicit emotion.
Music is a generative process, and I am the Bacchus that creates the wine, that presses the wine that makes mankind spiritually drunk. And that was a quote by Beethoven.
Nice.
And so I love Beethoven. I mean, he's king. But I like other people too. I like Schubert and Brahms, and I like Ravel. Just most classical artists. I get tired of some pieces an awful lot, and I won't. I'm tired of Vivaldi. I'm tired of the Nutcracker Suite, and I just, certain pieces that.
Sure, me too. Swan Lake, yeah.
Well, yeah. Did you dance?
I did a little dancing, but I wouldn't say that. But I did play in an orchestra all the way into college, briefly in college.
What did you play?
I'm an oboist.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
But I haven't played in years, so.
You know what they say about oboists?
Oh, no. What?
They're the most obsessive.
Oh.
Because with making the reeds and everything like that, what other musician does what the oboist does, right?
And they also have to lead the tuning. I don't know if people have ever noticed, but if you're listening to an orchestra, when they tune, everybody tunes, it's all based on the A produced by the oboist. The pressure is so bad.
Wow.
You want that thing to come out clear and you're like, ah!
Yeah. Do you still play?
No, I don't. I'm not a perfectionist in that way. Maybe that's why I gave it up.
Well, it's what I heard. I never really knew that. That's what they told me. I had a violinist here for dinner last night, along with an art critic. And so it was interesting hearing the conversation, the exchanges between the two. Nice.
Yeah. Recently, I've been dragging my husband to the BS. Now that our kids are up and out of the house and I'm not shuttling people back and forth to school, et cetera, and practices, and I've been dragging him to the orchestra here. And he didn't grow up with classical music like we did in our house because my brothers played, brass and the whole 9 yards. And so I dragged him to see, they were doing the Planets, Holst, the other day. Oh, it was hair raising. I just I had goosebumps all the way up and down my
Oh, wow.
Good.
Did he like Jupiter?
He loved it. Yeah. And I have to say, I didn't really... when something's right in your backyard, you don't think, well, they must be a world-class orchestra. Well, Baltimore's a world-class orchestra.
Yeah.
And their brass section is incredible. God, those guys are good.
Wow.
Yeah, so good and fun. I'm fascinated by you because you are obviously a creative soul. I sometimes think the printers and the artists sometimes they can fall into two very different camps. The printers who are, I don't have that creative push to make work of my own all the time. But I'm happy to be in the creative space, and the artist who does. But you interweave both of those things.
Yes.
Yeah.
I made a very conscious decision when I came back into the United States and I started back with stone lithography, and I said I could get swallowed up in this because nobody knows how to do it. And it's not that nobody, but I never knew anybody that did it. And so I started doing it, and I said, well, I'm going to promise myself to always do one work of my own in between anybody else's works. Oh. And I maintained that since 1971. And to this date, now I've done quite a bit of art. It's sort of stayed visible as much as possible. Just had my 104th solo show, and it's going on. It's not stopping.
That's kind of incredible.
Well, a lot of them were junky shows. I didn't put them all down. I had a solo show in my barber shop when I was a kid, but I didn't put that on the resume.
But I think that our young artists or even, mid-career artists probably are listening and thinking, how in the world do you do that? How do you gain the attention of a gallery or 10 that want and have the wherewithal to put on exhibitions?
That's a great question. And I have to cite an example. We had a famous gallery here in the area called Elaine Benson Gallery. And when I approached her, I said, can I show my work with you? And she says, no, I don't think so. I said, well, I do something that nobody else does. She said, well, we don't deal with prints. We only deal with originals. I crept in a hole, and I said, wow, this is just, I didn't like her after that. But then we met online, not online, on a buffet line at somebody's house. We were eating a dinner, and she said, you know, Dan, I've been thinking about what you do and everything. Would you like to do a project sometime? I said, well, what do you have in mind? She said, well, we could get a group of artists together, and maybe we could do a fundraiser for the hospital. I said, well, okay, who do you have? And she says, well, I could get Jimmy Ernst and Jim Brooks, and she mentioned a few other people, Jane Freilicher, and I said, well, I could probably get Elaine and Bill de Kooning. She said, oh, okay, and of course that's what she wanted to hear, because he was the top of the ladder. And so that evolved into something, and all of a sudden things changed, and she said, we'll give you a solo show along with that. And so that she had a change of heart. But it took a while to get to a little bit of a reputation rolling. It was a great project, except for Jane Freilicher, because I was printing her stone, and the stone broke. And so she said, oh, that's it. It's a bad omen. I can't do this anymore. So Dan Flavin stepped in and took over her place.
She didn't say, let's pull a Rauschenberg accident and... No. She didn't have that kind of a adventuresome spirit, no. I feel like there's sort of a sweet spot when you live in a place where there are a lot of artists, and then there's also a lot of galleries, and there's people who want to put together a portfolio like that, and you know these people and they know those people, and it's a tough go if you're living out somewhere, you know, in the middle of the Poconos or something.
That's very true. And before I came to Sag Harbor, I was living about an hour and a half from here in a cultural vacuum. There was nothing going on with art. Blue-collar community and people, you know, they just looked at, they liked the craft. They appreciated what I was doing with my hands. But as far as what the result was, they could care less. Huh. Unless I was doing something that they understood. If I was doing some pretty landscape or something like that, they would say, oh, that's, you know. But I was very disappointed coming from Europe, where I was selling a work every day. Oh. Enough to buy a Volkswagen van in cash. Whoa. You know, people in Europe, they respected the art. They respected the process. And then coming from there to come to Long Island in the middle of nowhere and not do anything, it was very disappointing. And then what happened was I started working with some artists. I actually started working with Robert Dash, who invited me to come to his studio. And one thing led to another, and we started working together. There's a little story behind that one, too. But I don't know if I should get into it or not. But
you can elect to edit it out later if you wish.
Okay, then I'll tell you, because it's a fun story. I don't know if you know the name Robert Dash or not, but he was pretty well known in the community. He was a sort of a Jane Freilicher, Fairfield Porter kind of two-dimensional landscape painter. And so I was talking with him, and I was sitting in a chair, and he said, Dan, I'd like to photograph you. And I said, yeah. He said, nude. And as he did that, he flared his nostrils and, kind of looked down at me. And I said, yeah, all right. So he's now. And I said, all right. I started taking off my shoes. And he said, and I said, I don't think so. And he says, oh, go on. Just like, and I said, all right. So I continued taking my clothes off, and he paraded me around from room to room, and he was photographing me. There was one photograph. We went into his dining room, and I guess I sat up on his dining room table, and the sun was coming in. It was really a nice sort of sunset. It was a profile shot, And I said, that's a good shot. I just felt it. And so several weeks later, he called me, and after the film was developed, it took a while, right? And so he says, you know, you're right. You were right about that photograph, and I'd like to work with you. So I think that if I hadn't taken off my clothes, the whole things in the East End might not have happened. So sometimes it takes a little bit of a thing like that. So.
Do you think he was saying to everybody that came to the house, you should take your clothes off because I want to take your picture?
Well, you know, he was actually a gentleman. He said, you know, I know you're straight, I'm gay, but I just want to let you know this is what I want to do. I mean, I was a gymnast. I had a great body and everything like that. So you know, what could I say? He was just doing what I would have done. You know, if I liked someone, I would think about it. I wouldn't always say it to someone, but you know, it was just a natural thing for him.
I suspect there's a kind of generational thing. I would never, in a bazillion years, say, "Gosh, you really have a nice physique." I mean, I would probably say, "Wow, you must work out," but I wouldn't say, "Hey, Dion, take off your clothes."
Well, I was used to being approached many times.
Okay.
You know, being fair-haired, blue-eyed boy that you know, from high school, college on. I mean, just, you know, it just happened. I never went that direction, but it just, you know, I was sort of used to it. Some people were gentlemen about it, and some people were not. So, yeah.
Wait, so we were talking. Wait, you started that story because you were going to tell me more about Dash.
Oh, so we started working together, and he was doing stones, and he said, you know, I'd like to introduce you to a friend of mine. Maybe she'd like to do something too. And that was Elaine. So he introduced me to Elaine, and Elaine and I got to know each other. And one day Elaine said, would you like to work with Bill? Sure. So that was it. But, you know, it wasn't that he was just, I mean, I had worked with Rauschenberg and Johns and Motherwell and printed Jim Dine. I mean, people like that before, but I really didn't. I was a printer at ULAE. I was not a master printer. I didn't have anything to say. I just did what I was told. So it wasn't the same idea as collaborating with someone and say, let's do this, let's do that. So it became a whole other status, so to say, to be on my own with these giants. Some of them were really great to work with, and some of the people weren't. Well, actually, everybody was great to work with in the creative sense. The mishap that Jane Feiliger experienced was one of those things that, you know, could happen to anyone.
Yeah.
As it did with Rauschenberg and Blackburn. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. How long were you at ULAE?
I was just there under a year.
Oh, wow.
And it was in 1972.
Okay.
And it was wonderful, really wonderful, being served breakfast every morning, watching Rauschenberg drink his Jack Daniels. And it was a real learning experience, a great honor to work with them, Rauschenberg especially, and Motherwell too. He was a beautiful man. Jasper was not as friendly. His, you know, he just didn't have what the other people did for me.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, personality. I think that's why people print around, right? Like you find somebody you really get along with personally, and then the work is magic. Yeah, and not everybody gets along with everybody.
And sometimes people have attitudes. Sid Solomon was one of those people that he had just finished making a film, and I think his ego was way up there. And by the time I got to him, he was very dictatorial about what he wanted. And so I brought, you know, I had to carry these stones to them. I mean, just big stones, and you know, I was young and strong, and a good-sized stone would be, you know, over 100 pounds. And I'd bring it there, and they would work on it, and I'd bring it back to my studio, because at the time I wasn't living in that area, so it was a little too far to for them to travel. Sid Solomon did this really incredibly beautiful black gestural touche drawing on the stone, and I said, "Wow, that's nice." And he said, "Print it in yellow." I said, "Gee, it's really beautiful in black." And he said, "Just do what I said." And I said, "Okay." And so I brought the stone home. And of course, when you're doing lithography, you always proof it in black first to see what it has, and it gives you the information. So I did it in black, and then I printed it in yellow as he requested. And I brought it out to him, showed it to him. And he said, "Uh-huh." I said, "You know, I hope you don't mind, but I have this other print that I had to do anyway, and just to see." And I said, "Well, I'll show it to you." And it was in black, and he looked at it, and he says, "Wow, printed in black." So it was interesting that he changed his whole attitude once he was able to see and not imagine. And so it was really great. We worked after that together, and he had a different sense about himself.
Huh. Interesting. People are funny. I did want to ask you what your plans are for your own work, and also for the work you've accumulated from other artists.
Well, my own work is just continuously going on and on. I have a series of work that I've been very dedicated to. That this was sort of interesting because I was asked to go into this estate that was falling apart, and raccoons when the roof was caving in, and can you see what you can recover out of this? And I went. It was an old art colony, and there were broken picture frames and paper and stuff. And I found some things in this estate that were valuable. I found some vintage photographs and some drawings. Nothing terribly valuable. In between things, I found a Rembrandt etching.
Oh.
And that was sort of cool. And I put all these things aside, and that I found an old press and a trailer and all kinds of concrete blocks and things that I like building. And so I would scrounge up these things for myself. One of the things that I saw was a pile of zinc plates. And it was about 2-3 inches thick, and they were big. They were 30 inches. And they were put together with brown paper in between. And I had to pry them apart with a screwdriver. And they probably sat for 50 years, and they were very oxidized and deteriorated. They were no longer good for what their intention was. But I brought them home, and I said, "Oh, maybe I can clean them up, sand them down, and use them." Well, I took them home, and my assistant, Andrea Bates, who actually works for ULA now, and she cleaned them up with me, and we printed them in black, all of the oxidation. And I made my own dry point tool with an auger and a broomstick, and used some root killer, copper sulfate, and brushed it on the zinc where I wanted it. And I created a series of 22 etchings. I'll have to show you the photograph sometime.
I saw some online, actually.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
The 22 black and white etchings, I applied for a Paula Krasner grant with them, and I got it. And it just couldn't have been better timing, because it happened right when COVID came out. Because there, all of a sudden, I had $30,000 that I could live from. And so I had these black and white etchings, and then I was going to work with color on top of them. And that's what I've been doing, little by little. Probably going to be about over 100 of them when they're finished. And I just brought 20 of them to put in an exhibition in Stony Brook area. It's opening tomorrow.
Oh, wow. As we're recording this. Amazing. We're in late January, people. But you show them...
Yeah, you're holding your hands the right way.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
See if you can
Here's the photograph.
Oh, look, here's a photograph.
Oh, yeah, sure.
You might have to put it closer to the camera.
How does this?
Thank you. Oh,
Does
that's
that
cool.
work? Does
Yeah.
that work? So, yeah, you held your hands exactly right, because once they are pried apart, they were mirror images. They were like Rorschach of each other. After I finished them, I said, I've got to come up with something a little bit in terms of what am I going to call these things other than etchings. And so I decided to think about the term opposites. And what were opposites? Well, in the Greek slave, Aesop had the hare and the tortoise, the grasshopper, and as opposites of each other. And so they took on the titles of these characters and whatnot, and they expanded into other more humorous titles too. And so I've been having such a good time with them, because they were all printed in one color, and then I'm painting on top of them.
Ah, okay.
So they're hybrid works. So they're no longer pure prints. They're no longer pure. They're not pure paintings.
That is okay.
They are what they are.
But it's cool too, because whatever was in the zinc that's gotten inked up and printed is mixing with whatever you're putting on top. But also the plate itself was etched by nature and time.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's a collaboration between you and nature.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You hit it. You hit it right on the nose.
That's good. I love it.
Yeah. I don't know if you know Charlie Riley.
No.
Charlie Riley was the director of the Nassau County Museum. He wrote a beautiful, beautiful article on it, on that process and how it was evolved. I'll send it to you if you like.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, I think they're interesting, and I like the presentation of them mirroring each other, because it's almost like you're there for the prying open of this secret that's been, accumulating for so long.
Oh, yeah, I like that word. I like what you just said, the secret. Yeah.
That's the curator in me, Dan.
That's good. Yeah, secrets and mysteries are nice.
Yeah, exactly. I also wanted to, before I let you go, because we're over an hour now, I can't believe it. You built your own house.
I did.
And I've seen some pictures. I watched a video of you showing people around, and I just thought, this is so like Wharton Esherick's house. Have you ever been to his home?
I've heard it. No, I have not.
It's sort of Chadds Ford-ish, Pennsylvania. Uh-huh. And he also was a printmaker, but also a furniture maker. And his house it's tiny. It's like a little hobbit house, but everything woodworky is him, and it all fits together like a shipwright. Everything has its place, and your house reminds me of it. It's really beautiful. I love it.
Would you like a little tour?
Oh, sure.
Because I can do this pretty easily, I think. I just have to. I'll show you a few little things. It's a post and beam construction. And I started it, 1993, and it took 6 years to get finished. And post and beam consistent. Well, you'll see the ceiling as we're. But in the center of the house is, if you can see this or not. Can you see this?
Oh yeah.
Okay, there's a heart. It's carved, and so there's that heart there.
Nice.
And, let's see. Else we can see the sunlight's coming in here. Here's another little highlight. Here is something I built myself. This is it's a chandelier that goes all the way up to the ceiling.
Oh wow!
The ceiling's 30 feet tall, and I found these rings in the woods because they could come from wagon wheels.
Oh, okay.
And it's a hand-blown glass. Oh. And it's not electrified. It's all candle lit.
Wait, how do you light it?
Well, that's a good question, because up above there is, I don't know if you could see what you can see. In order to light the candles, I have to put in box toccata in fugue and make like Igor and go up the stairs and then lower it with a chain hoist. And I have to have 15 people here to light the candles, and it gives us a beautiful, gorgeous light.
Oh, I bet.
And there's so many different things. As I go to the kitchen, I'll show you one little thing. Up here is a beam up there that, when we were cutting it, there were sparks that came out of it, and there was a bullet from the year 1775 based upon the rings.
What?
So it was a revolutionary time beam. And then, and my kitchen floor is probably the most unique floor in the world because it has
tile.
200 artist tiles that they all came here and they painted, except for two people. One of them, I don't know if you could see this, and that's Chuck Close on the floor there. And there's
Nice.
Helen Harrison and Alan Shields and Esteban Vicente. Are you seeing these all right? I don't know if you can see them. Are
Yeah,
they showing?
it's a little fuzzy at the moment, but that's okay.
All right, well,
Who organized the 200 artists to paint tiles?
I did. I just
You invited people to do it.
Yeah, they all came over here, and they painted, and then they were fired. Oh, you know what? I'm going to show you something that you'll never see before. You'll also never see in anyone in the whole world. I'm going to take you into the bathroom. Now, over here, behind my door, is a closet.
Yes. Oh, yes. Uh-huh.
So this is a knob that opens and closes the door, right? So you know what that is?
Yeah,
It's
I can
a
see
bone.
it. Yeah.
It's
I
a
know what it
bone.
is because I saw you describe it. Yes.
Yeah, it's a bone.
It's a hip bone or something.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. And that came, I got that in New Zealand in 1993 when I had my hip replaced.
That's your bone?
Yes. When I had my hip replaced, I asked the surgeon if I could have my bone back because I was building a house, and he said, yeah, okay. So, he gave me the bone back.
When I was doing my homework on you, I did see you talk about the hip bone. So that's how I knew it was a hip bone. I never would have guessed otherwise.
Well, you did your homework.
Well, as any respectable curator type should.
I love being in the woods. I love nature. I have a cabin up in the Catskills, and I don't have running water or electricity. I have an outhouse, and there's a brook that runs right alongside of it, and I go up there to paint and escape from everything and everyone.
Sounds idyllic, but challenging. I kind of like electricity myself.
Well, I have a generator and I have solar, but it's not hooked up to the grid.
Okay.
So I have that especially since I like music, and I have to sort of have some nice classical music. I have the old cassettes that I play on the thing up there.
Nice. When I was a kid, we had an 8-track player.
Yep.
We had about 10 tapes, one of which was probably John Denver's greatest hits. But there were, I think, probably 3/4 of them were symphonies. Mahler 1, Sibelius 2, Dvorak 9, and probably Finlandia.
Yeah, you remember them all.
Yeah. Well, those are my favorites still.
Oh, good.
Yeah, they imprinted on your brain as there's some age where music kind of formulates in your brain, and for me, those childhood symphonies that we heard all the time they're in there.
And you still like them.
I do still listen to them, actually, frequently. Anyway, well, I think we should wrap it up. I wanted to thank you so much for coming on the show. I really, 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 really appreciate it.
You were so much fun.
Oh, good.
And so stimulating. Thank you so much. I really, really enjoyed it.
You're welcome. You're very welcome. Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to this episode with the legendary Dan Welden. I enjoyed our conversation so much. Thanks, Dan, for being a great guest. I really appreciate it. And also, as usual, to my other support network people, to Dan Fury of Extension Audio for being my sound guy. Thank you so much. To Uncle Michael Diamond for the use of his original music. And also to Skip Barnhart and Lee Turner, who sent me sounds from their studios for the soundscape at the top and bottom of each episode. images that Dan and I talked about are over on the website, platemarkpodcast.com, and you know the rest. Over there is also a support and donate button. You can help me keep the lights on. And also there's a new listener survey. Why don't you click that, take it, and let me know what you think. Is that it? I think that might be it. We'll see you next time.